Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Michaela. Today we are going to be updating my reading spread and my bullet journal. Let's just jump right into it. So we're halfway through September, and not only am I behind on updating my tracker, I'm also kind of behind on my goal to read 52 books this year. I think I'm about 6 books behind, but it's fine. It's fine. Fall is the perfect time to snuggle in with a book and catch up on that goal. So that is what we're going to be doing this fall and winter to make sure we reach our goal of 52 books this year. But I honestly have not updated my journal in months. And I've read quite a few books. I think I'm on 27 or 28 books in for the year, and I just have to update them. So let's go do that. So I did this library checkout card for my 2022 book tracker this year. If you haven't seen my video of how I set up my bullet journal, I'll be sure to link it up above and down below so you can go check that out if you would like. So here is the checkout card, and honestly, the reason why I was behind was because I only made one card and I couldn't decide if I wanted to flip it over and go on the back of this card or if I wanted to start a whole new one. But we're gonna go ahead and use the back of this one, and I also went ahead and cut out 2 more pieces of watercolor paper for 2 more cards. So I wanted the paper of each of the checkout cards to have kind of like a vintage, like worn look to them. So I'm just using some brown watercolor paints to create that vintage worn look. While I paint these cards, I'll go ahead and tell you about the books that I've read so far this year. I did an entire video on all the books that I read in January. I will link that up above and down below. Feel free to go check that out. I go into pretty detailed descriptions of each of those books. But for now, I'm gonna start with the books that I read in February. So the first book I read in February was Where the Crawdads Sing. And honestly, I kept seeing this book on booktube, book talk, bookstagram. Everyone was talking about how great it was. I read it and I gave it 3 stars. I use Goodreads to track all of my books, and Goodreads does not let you do like half stars. They only let you do full whole stars. So I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, but if I'm being honest, it's more like a 2-star. I just didn't see the appeal of, what people were talking about with this book. And I know it's a movie, and I'll probably watch the movie anyway since I read the book. I might as well watch the movie as well. Next up, I read Once Upon a Broken Heart, which I gave 3 stars. And I also read Caraval by the same author, which I also gave 3 stars. The last book I read in February was called A Man Called Uva, and I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, but this one was still more like a 2.5, 2.75 star. I believe this one is also a movie that I will be watching. The first book that I read in March was called The 10,000 Doors of January. I actually put this book on hold back in January because I wanted to read it during January, but it's fine. I gave this one 3 stars. I thought it was a fairly interesting book. The second book of March was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I gave this one 4 stars. I've also seen this one all over social media. It was longer than I thought it really needed to be, but the story kept me interested. The last book of March was The Wife Between Us, and this is actually a reread for me. By this point, I was kind of in a reading slump, and I was tired of reading 2.5, 3-star books, and so I picked up something that I knew I liked, and this one has kind of like twists in it, and so it was interesting to read it for a second time, knowing what I already knew about it and kind of trying to see if I picked up on different clues when I read it a second time. I gave this book 4 stars. So I got through 2 books in April. I read The Maidens, which I gave 3 stars, and I also read The Hunting Party, which I also gave 3 stars. The first book I read in May was called Ariadne, and I gave it 3 stars. And the second book I read was called They Both Die at the End, and this again is another reread. I'm not one to reread books because sometimes I feel like it's a waste of my time because I want to read something I've never read before, but I do really enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars the first time I read it, and I was hoping I would be able to give it a 5th star the second time, but I don't know, there was still just something missing there. I still gave it 4 stars the second time around, but it is a very sweet book. It tore me up at the end. I mean, there's not really a spoiler because it's in the title. They both die at the end. You should have no surprises, but it's a really good book. Next up, I read The Death of Mrs. Westaway, which I gave 3 stars, and I also read Mr. Malcolm's List, which I gave 3 stars on Goodreads, but it's more like a 2.5, 2.75. I know this one is a movie, so I do plan to watch the movie, and honestly, I read this one because it was short and quick, and I knew that I was behind on my books at this point. So the only book I read in June was Fairest of All, and I was so excited for this series because I love when authors give light to the villain of the story and we get to hear their side of the story, when we get to understand them a bit better. But this series just is not good in my personal opinion. It just didn't do what I felt like it had the space to do. I wanted these books to be way more than they were. So I was only able to get through Fairest of All in June, and I even started The Beast Within in June, but I didn't finish it until July because I was put in another reading slump at this point. So that brings us to the books I read in July. I read The Beast Within. Put me in a reading slump. So I went ahead and picked up one of my favorite books of all time, The Song of Achilles. This is another reread to get me out of that reading slump, to kind of keep me going forward. The Song of Achilles did help in getting me out of a reading slump, so I went ahead and pushed through to finish reading the 3rd book of the series, Poor Unfortunate Souls. This was the one I was most excited for because I really wanted to hear Ursula's point of view on the story, and it just was not hitting like how I really wanted it to. There's a common theme in all the stories that kind of carry over that I feel like we could have done without, and I feel like the author kind of makes the books about that particular theme. I get they're trying to connect, the books, but it's just not I don't think I'll be reading the rest of the series, let's just say that. And the last book I read in July was called The Girl Before. It's a psychological thriller, and if you guys didn't know, I love psychological thrillers. They're so good. I gave this one 3 stars. So the first book of August was Boyfriend Material, which was a super cute book. I gave this one 4 stars, and I can't wait to read Husband Material, which I think comes out this year. I don't know, I gotta check on that. Next up, I read the book Pet, which was not my typical read. I gave it 4 stars just because of how interesting and creative it was, and the author, how they handled a difficult topic in a creative way. I also read Honey Girl, which I gave 3 stars, and the last book of August was another reread. You guys, I don't even reread books like that. I promise I don't. But this year, I don't know. I think I really wanted to reread some of these books. I read The Silent Patient again, and I gave this one 4 stars. It's a really good book, and it's another one of those books that's like, when you read it the second time, you read it differently than you read it the first time. So yeah, this one was good. September has been a pretty good month for me as far as books. The first book I read was The Last Thing He Told Me, and I gave this one 3 stars on Goodreads, but it's more like a 3.5 star. I thought it was gonna be different, so that's why I didn't give it a full 4 star, but yeah, it wasn't too bad. Next up, I read The Spanish Love Deception. I've seen this one all over socials about how cute it was, and I'm not gonna lie, it was cute. I did quite enjoy this one. Enemies to Lovers trope is one of my favorites, so this one was pretty cute. And the last book I have on my list for right now in September is The Golden Couple, which I gave 4 stars to. I love these authors. I've read all of their books so far, and this one didn't disappoint. You guys, my goodness, I almost forgot. I left out one book. I read 2 books in June, actually. I read Hamnet as well, and this is the story of William Shakespeare's son, Hamnet, who the play Hamlet is based off of. And this one was really good. I was reading this one along with Fairest of All at the same time, and I think I kind of was preferring this one. And I gave this one 4 stars. I'm also filling in my book bingo page, and here are the books that I use to color in these sections on my bingo card. So this is the book I used for Start a Series, a book to movie or show, a book with 1-word title, reread a book, Goodreads Choice Award winner. I believe this one won for Best Thriller / Mystery. Judge a book by its title. Again, I wanted to read this one in January because it had January in the title. A female author. A 4-star rating on Goodreads. And a book with an LGBTQ plus character. Here's where we ended up, you guys. We have a few squares left, and I know some of the books that I already read could probably be used to color in some of these squares, but I want to use these squares to help me pick other books for the rest of the year. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye.